Declaro abierta
The 11th plenary meeting of the substantive session of the United Nations Conference to negotiate a legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons leading towards their total elimination is called to order. Madam High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, Secretary General of the Conference, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you for this second substantive session of the conference, which is being held in accordance with General Assembly Resolution 71258 of the 23rd of December 2016. We had a very productive session in March, and as we enter this final phase of the conference, I am confident that with the necessary political will, we can achieve the goal set by the General Assembly, that we make our best endeavours to conclude as soon as possible a legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons, leading towards their total elimination. Today we are in a working group. Everyone represents their country, but united together in the historic commitment that we recognize that we have, and that we will do in earnest, with great conviction, convinced as we are of the moral imperative that brings us here. You have my personal commitment as President and the commitment of the team that supports us from the Secretariat and the conference team to ensure that we are successful in this mandate. Before beginning our substantive work, however, I would like to extend a particularly warm welcome to the newly appointed High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, Madam Izumi Nakamitsu. I welcome her and invite her to address the conference. You have the floor, Madam.
Madam President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for this opportunity to address you at the outset of the second substantive session of the conference. I am aware that you are all very keen to dive straight into substantive discussions, so I do not intend to provide lengthy remarks today. I'd rather limit myself to some general observations regarding the significance of this process from the perspective of a total newcomer to this scene. In accordance with General Assembly Resolution 71/258, these negotiations aim to achieve a clear legal prohibition of nuclear weapons. These talks are truly historic as they represent the most significant negotiations in the area of nuclear disarmament. Nuclear disarmament has been the longest sought objective of the United Nations, dating back to the very first resolution adopted by the General Assembly, in fact in January 1946. We have seen some impressive gains since that time. Yet it has been more than 20 years now since the United Nations disarmament bodies have produced a multilateral, legally binding instrument on nuclear weapons. The lack of progress in recent times is despite the growing urgency posed by the deteriorating international security landscape and by the new awareness of the devastating humanitarian consequences if nuclear weapons were ever to be used again. The heroic and tireless efforts by Hibakusha guide the international community to move towards a world free of nuclear weapons. The need for progress is very clear, and yet there seem to be no near-term prospects for further reductions. Some countries are actively improving and modernizing their nuclear arsenals. Promising international initiatives remain blocked. Some even question whether, in this environment of increasing security tensions, the further pursuit of nuclear disarmament should be pursued. But it is important to recall that measures for disarmament have served historically as a means to ease international tensions and to prevent conflict. The international community has also long recognized that partial measures and systematic steps are needed to facilitate the elimination of nuclear weapons. In this spirit, I hope that your negotiations result in an effective instrument that complements and strengthens existing instruments, especially the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, and the treaties establishing nuclear weapon-free zones. In my view, it will also be critical that outcome of your negotiations build a bridge to the future in order to facilitate the inclusive engagement which we will need in order to achieve the total elimination of nuclear weapons. In order to accomplish these aims, I believe that great care should be taken in finalizing an instrument that is legally sound, technically accurate, and also politically wise. If these aims can be accomplished, the outcome of your work can make an important contribution to the advancement of nuclear disarmament. The UN Office for Disarmament Affairs is pleased to support the convening of this important conference mandated by the General Assembly and will endeavor to do its very best to assist your work. I wish all of you the best for your proceedings in the next 3 weeks. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Doy las gracias a la...
I thank the High Representative for her statement and for her motivation at the beginning of our work. Before we proceed to examine the draft convention, I invite the conference to resume its consideration of Agenda Item 5, Organisation of Work, in order to examine its programme of work for the current session.
Durante mis consultas con las delegaciones,
During my consultations with delegations both in Geneva and here in New York, I repeatedly encountered a strong desire of delegations to immediately proceed to a detailed discussion of the draft convention in light of the limited amount of time available to us, rather than engaging in a protracted general exchange of views. This was a point of view expressed many times to the President, so I think we can get down to the detailed discussions. And I informed delegations of my desire to proceed accordingly at the briefing for delegations that was held on Monday the 12th of June in this room. And I also circulated this to you in a letter that was sent to all delegations. I have therefore revised the indicative timetable for the meetings of the conference, of which the conference took note on the 31st of March. and which was subsequently published as document A/Conf 229/2017/3/Addendum 1. The revised version has been issued as document A/Conf 229/2017/3/Addendum 1/Revision 1. Delegations will note that this document foresees that we immediately proceed to the read-through of Cluster 1, the Preamble, and then continue to take up the other clusters on a rolling basis. Delegations wishing to do so would be able to make general remarks in the course of their statements pertaining to specific clusters. And certainly, when you're taking the floor to refer to the first cluster, the Preamble. May I take it, therefore, that the conference wishes to take note of the revised indicative timetable contained in document A/Conf 229/2017/3/Addendum 1/Revision 1, and proceed accordingly. It is so decided.
La conferencia ha concluido.
The conference has thus concluded this stage of its consideration of Agenda Item 5. I now invite your attention to Agenda Item 9. In order to consider the Paragraph 8 of General Assembly Resolution 71258 of the 23rd of December 2016 on a legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons leading towards their total elimination. We're now going to examine the first version of the Convention on the Disarmament of Nuclear Weapons in document A/Conf 229/2017/CRP1. Since this is a working document on which we've been working and discussing in English, I'm now going to, after this brief introduction in my mother tongue, I'm going to now switch to English to work in English.
As you are all aware, I circulated the text of the draft convention on the prohibition of nuclear weapons on 22nd May. On that day in Geneva, as well as this past Monday in New York, I convened an informal meeting in which I explained the principles which guided the preparations of the draft and highlighted some of its main provisions. The text of my remarks for both briefings has been circulated to all delegations and posted on the website of the conference. I will therefore not take up too much time now to repeat those remarks. I will rather just make a few general remarks on the draft convention as a prelude to the article-by-article review that we will undertake. Let me start by mentioning that the draft is intended as a starting point for the negotiations. It proposes specific language for the provisions of the Convention based upon the general remarks and positions expressed by the delegations at the first session. Overall, I have to say that I found the discussions at the March session to be robust and constructive. The exchange of views covered all aspects of the legally binding instruments, including its principles and objectives, preamble and core prohibitions, positive obligations, institutional arrangements, and other provisions. These are all reflected in the draft convention, although we recognize that some aspects are more mature and some others need further consideration, reflection, and discussion by this conference. The draft incorporates elements that build on points of convergence in order to preserve the constructive and collaborative spirit that we were able to foster in March, but at the same time, with the objective of the first draft to be short so that we can facilitate the discussion and the first reading of the document. In addition, in many places, the draft includes language that specifies some technical details and complexities in order to fill in necessary details. In some instances, specific elements are proposed to draw attention to important questions that the conference has yet to consider. As you may be aware, the draft is not exhaustive of all the issues discussed in March. At the first session, it was apparent that further discussion was needed on a number of important issues, including the need for discussion among technical and legal experts. In some instances, I have set aside certain issues not ripe for drafting in order to enable the conference to continue their deliberation without prejudice to the outcome. As it may be necessary to aid the conference in its deliberations, especially of the more technical, specific technical matters, I am aware of the need to arrange for the participation of experts, as we had a very good experience during the March session, and these experts can provide additional insight and analysis to conference during side events or, as appropriate, at key moments in our discussions. As I proposed at the informal meeting on June 12, and in accordance with the revised indicative timetable, it is not my intention to hold a lengthy general exchange of views, and I know that you are ready to start exchanging among ourselves on the content. I therefore encourage all delegations that wish to make a general statement to do so at the outset of our review of the preamble. That said, before we start the article-by-article review, I will make a very brief remark about the preamble and offer the floor for delegations to make a general statements and additionally refer to the content of the articles included. I propose to follow this first reading of the text in the following manner. At the outset of our consideration for each cluster, as reflected in the revised indicative timetable, I will first open the floor for any delegation wishing to make general comments. We will then turn to consider each article in the draft convention. For each article, paragraph and subparagraph, I will present the text as contained in CRP.1. During the presentation, I will also provide some explanatory remarks regarding the origin, the intent, and rationale for the specific language used in the text in order to help orient your vision. As this is already a negotiation, I encourage delegations to constructively interact with each other and to request the floor as necessary in order to engage with the points raised during the discussion. After we have exhausted the discussion, we will then proceed to consider the next article, paragraph, or subparagraph. At the end of the discussion under each cluster, I will devote up to 15 minutes for statements by representatives of non-governmental organizations, as previously agreed. Please note that it is not my intent to conduct any type of drafting exercise during this review. The purpose of this first reading is to enable all delegations to have an opportunity to provide comments on the draft text and to exchange views with each other. If any delegation has specific text or wording they wish to make available in writing, please approach the Secretariat who can circulate the material to all participants. Once we have completed the review, I will take stock of where we stand and propose to the conference how we can proceed with the remaining meetings of the conference. Unless I hear otherwise, I will take that the conference wish to proceed accordingly. It is so decided. I now invite the conference to consider the preamble of the draft convention. I have two delegations who have requested the floor to make comments at the moment that we are arriving at the consideration of the preamble. We have the delegation of Brazil and the delegation of Austria. I now give the floor to the delegation of Brazil.
Thank you very much, Madam President. First of all, let me express my delegation's satisfaction in seeing you once again leading our work in the conference. Rest assured of our continued support. We commend the work you have carried out during the intersessional period, and we appreciate in particular the draft convention that we will start discussing today. In our view, Draft 0 is a good reflection of the issues that were raised during the first session of the conference and constitutes a very good basis for the beginning of our deliberations. As we progress on this first reading, we will be making some proposals to the preamble that we believe are friendly and constructive in nature. Our objective is to further develop the text in a balanced manner while retaining the elements you have put forward. They seek to underline the humanitarian imperatives that have been the driving force of this process, and to reaffirm that the prohibition of nuclear weapons is an end in itself as per the United Nations General Assembly mandate, which does not affect the inalienable rights of the states to use nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. Paragraphs 2 to 5 will require careful consideration as they address the most technically complex issues in the treaty. It is our view that verification does not require extensive formulation at this point for the purpose of asserting a legal prohibition of nuclear weapons. We should refer to it, of course, but only to the extent necessary to indicate a commitment in association with future further steps under the treaty. Safeguards on non-proliferation are a complex matter already extensively addressed under the NPT and other agreements, as the nuclear weapons-free zones and the Brazil-Argentina quadrilateral agreement, and therefore do not require extensive drafting. In fact, it would be counterproductive to do so, as we would create undesirable parallel or inconsistent obligations in the margins of the already existing ones. The Brazilian delegation looks forward to engaging constructively with you and with other delegations over the next 3 weeks as we work on the text. You can count on our cooperation so that at the end of this session, the conference is ready to adopt a treaty that will fill a disconcerting legal gap on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. We are eager to contribute to a collective breakthrough towards a world free of all weapons of mass destruction. I thank you very much, Madam President.
Le agradezco al distinguido.
I thank the distinguished ambassador of Brazil, and I now give the floor to the delegation of Austria.
Thank you, Madam President. At the outset, I would also like to express our gratitude for the exemplary way in which you have conducted your important office and the many hours you have invested in bilateral and other consultations, and certainly that goes also to your team. And we want to say right up front, we think you have provided us with an excellent basis for our negotiations over the next 3 weeks. I also want to express my gratitude to the Undersecretary General for her introductory words. I think that is an issue which is very important also for my delegation, that the new treaty will fit into the overall architecture of disarmament treaties. And for us it is somehow the missing puzzle, the missing piece in the big puzzle. So we will be careful that it will fit well. You have taken up in your excellent draft all those issues which enjoyed a high degree of support. And what remains now in our view is to jointly find the best language to express this context so that we will be hopefully in a position to agree on the new treaty by July 7th. And what we have heard from all quarters, also outside of this room, there's a high expectation that we will finalize our work by the 7th of July. So we will have to work hard, and we will have also to show some restraint because we have all our instructions. But if we follow them to the bitter end, we would have 130 differing versions of the treaty and not have one treaty. But I'm hopeful because we have seen in the week in March that there's a strong commitment to establishing a nuclear weapons prohibition treaty. And of course, this will only be possible when we show some inclination to give in also to other wordings. And certainly it will be necessary that we do not try to bring in too many additional matters, subjects. For us, it's the foundation that we are laying. And we are not yet there that we are building the walls and the roof. So we should resist from the temptation to take the second or third step ahead of the first. So we want to work with you in this spirit. And concerning the preamble part, which we think is very good, has the most important things, we would have 2 additional PPs to propose, but it depends on you in which way you want to conduct. Should we go 1, 2, 3, and so on? And if it would fit, mine would be 2B and 2 ter. Should we do this at the time when we are finishing PP2, or would you prefer us that we wait until you have run through the whole PP and then we jump back? It's up to you. We are always ready to follow your advice. Thank you.
Muchas gracias al distinguido.
Thank you very much to the Distinguished Ambassador of Austria. Yes, well, I wanted to ask delegations if they have proposals for new text to make them after we've looked at each of the existing paragraphs. So I do invite you to take the floor now if you have any proposals. The delegation of Thailand has the floor.
Madam President, thank you for giving me the floor. And first, I would like to thank the High Representative for Disarmament for her statement. I am speaking on behalf of the member states of ASEAN Association of Southeast Asian Nations, that are Brunei Darussalam, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, People's Democratic Republic, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, Vietnam, and Thailand, my own country. ASEAN shares the common goal of realizing a world without nuclear weapons. We firmly believe that this UN conference is a vital step towards this goal and towards general and complete disarmament. This belief underpins ASEAN's commitment to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and the Bangkok Treaty establishing the Southeast Asia Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone. We would like to extend our appreciation to the President of the conference for the early circulation of Draft Zero. This draft has genuinely captured the vital elements discussed during the March session of the conference. It is also a good foundation for our negotiations during this session and on the more complex issues that will need to be discussed. We wish to support the President in moving quickly towards an article-by-article reading of Draft Zero. We believe that this and the firm and sincere commitment of the Member States will allow for the successful implementation of the mandate of the conference by the 7th of July. ASEAN recognizes the important balance between nuclear disarmament, non-proliferation, and the peaceful use of nuclear energy as enshrined by the NPT. We acknowledge the important contributions of competent international organizations, including the International Atomic Energy Agency and the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization, in sharing their knowledge, technical know-how, as well as core competence, which can help ensure that the substantive negotiations of our conference will lead us to achieve practical, efficient, and effective provisions. In this regard and in general, we would also like to recognize the role of civil society for their invaluable contributions. Thank you, Madam President.
Le agradezco al distinguido embajador.
I thank the Distinguished Ambassador of Thailand for his statement, and I now give the floor to the delegation of Ireland.
Thank you, Madam President, and good morning. Allow me to also start by expressing our appreciation for your remarkable work in this process, both at the first very successful session, but also intersessionally. Madam President and colleagues, we are faced today with a historic opportunity to make progress and to create real change on one of the most complex and difficult issues in the international sphere. Experience has shown that real progress is possible when there is goodwill, political leadership, engagement in good faith, and a strong commitment to a common goal. The adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015 was a prime example of what Member States, the UN, and civil society can achieve when working together to address issues of global concern. Nuclear disarmament is one such issue and is closely interlinked with the others. Nuclear disarmament and health and sustainable development and climate change and migration are interdependent, are all pieces of the broader picture and should be addressed as such. I think the references to adverse environmental and health impacts of nuclear contamination at the recent Oceans Conference is just a very recent example of this recent reminder of these interlinkages. Madam President, Ireland welcomes the first draft of the Prohibition Convention, which I think has distilled the key points of convergence that emerged in March and which we see as a good, solid basis for further work. We were very satisfied with the interactive debate that took place in the March session and with the rich interventions which has enabled a meaningful exchange and enhanced our understanding of the important issues which the new legal instrument will have to address. Civil society's input and the contributions of experts were, as always, very valuable in this respect. Madam President, in our view, the preamble strikes a good balance and sets out the object and purpose of the Convention, as well as the reasons for its adoption. We were pleased to see reflected in the preamble a lot of the elements which we had raised during the first session and subsequently. Today, as we have our discussions, we would like to offer a number of suggestions in the hope that these will be helpful in the further development of the draft. These are amendments to existing paragraphs, as well as a small number of proposals to include new language, and we will seek the floor as we reach these under your direction. Thank you very much.
Le agradezco al distinguido embajador de Irlanda.
I thank the distinguished ambassador of Ireland, and I now give the floor to the delegation of the Philippines.
Thank you, Madam President. The Philippine delegation aligns itself with the ASEAN statement just delivered by our colleague from Thailand. And we join other delegations in commending you for coming up with the draft text of the treaty, which to us is a very good basis for our work in the coming days. We are pleased to note that it incorporates a number of Philippine and ASEAN positions, which, as I expressed in my statement last March, spring from our experience with the Southeast Asia nuclear weapon-free zone. There are other principles that we would like to see adopted. We therefore stand ready to engage with you and our counterparts to further enrich the draft text. Madam President, as we embark on our work ahead, allow me to underline some considerations that will keep us focused at this conference. First, the objective of this conference is to agree on a legally binding instrument as our fundamental deliverable. With this zero draft, my delegation believes that this objective is within our grasp and that it makes it possible for us to come up with an agreed text by July 7. Second, given the short time to get our work done, we believe that the framework approach for the treaty is reasonable and pragmatic. It is unrealistic for us to attempt tackling in detail highly technical and complex issues, important as they are, and yet hope to achieve agreement in 3 weeks. Instead, the treaty text should indicate clear pathways where these issues could be further thrashed out in the future. Third, an important goal of our work is to universalize this treaty so that nuclear weapon states can find their way to acceding to it in the future. This treaty should therefore serve as a point of engagement rather than discouragement, a pathway to deepening dialogue rather than the end of discussion between the nuclear weapon and the non-nuclear weapon states. After all, the final goal to which we all subscribe to, that is the total elimination of nuclear weapons, can only be realized with the will of both the nuclear and non-nuclear weapon states. Madam President, you can count on the Philippines' support and cooperation throughout this conference. Thank you.
Agradezco al distinguido.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Philippines, and I give the floor to the delegation of Liechtenstein.
Thank you very much, Madam President. It's a pleasure to see you back here. And we're pleased to see that the process has brought again together a large majority of states and civil society behind the common cause that we're pursuing, convinced that real security eludes us as long as there is a risk that nuclear weapons may unfold their indiscriminate, deadly potential. We would like to commend you for all the work that you have done since we last met and for presenting us with a draft that we believe provides us with a sound basis for our upcoming discussions. We're grateful for the explanations that you have given to us this morning. And we do believe that the draft represents in many parts what we see as a political middle ground in the wider spectrum of views expressed so far, which we find to be particularly useful. We appreciate the effort to keep the draft as short and concise as possible. We have consistently argued that the right balance needs to be struck between ambitious and pragmatism in this text. In our view, the potential of the treaty will be realized gradually, and we should pursue the goal of creating a basis for eventual universal adherence to the treaty That, of course, is a distant goal, but a goal that we do believe we have to keep in mind. Against that background, again, we do believe that you have found a good balance in this text, while certainly fine-tuning is possible. The core prohibitions are a good example for that. While not all of our proposals have been reflected in your Article 1, there is an overall balance in the text that we hope can find broad support among the participants. With respect to the important questions for compliance, verification and safeguards addressed in Articles 2 to 5, we support the general vision behind the draft, but we also recognize the complexity of the issues at hand and look forward to our discussions on these aspects in particular that we believe will prove to be crucial and central for the success of our exercise. We will be looking for your firm leadership in guiding us through what we believe will be a difficult and complex negotiation with a view to really seizing the unique opportunity that we are presented with during this conference. On the preamble, we will have a number of proposals to make when we get to that. Let me just flag that the aspects of particular importance to us are the references to international humanitarian law. We would like to see something slightly different and a bit more general in PP4, and we also do believe that a reference to the fact that the dangers posed by the mere existence of nuclear weapons is an important addition to this. Beyond that, we will be working to making the preamble perhaps even a bit more streamlined and a bit more focused. I thank you very much, Madam President.
Le agradezco al
I thank the distinguished ambassador of Liechtenstein, and I give the floor to the delegation of Indonesia.
Thank you, Madam President. Firstly, I would like to thank the High Representative for her comprehensive briefing. And I wish to thank you, Madam President, for the continued efforts and relentless endeavors which you and the Bureau have placed during the intersessional period since our previous round. Indonesia stands ready to constructively participate in the negotiation process during this round of our conference, which I fervently hope will generate fruitful results under your most able leadership. In principle, Indonesia is supportive of the negotiating process for this instrument. We think that the draft is a good basis to build upon. Of course, like any other draft, suggestions may be proposed in order to improve the text, but we feel that you have done a superb job in summing up the elements expressed in the previous session into the draft instrument. Indonesia associates itself with the intervention delivered by Thailand on behalf of ASEAN and would like to add the following points in its national capacity. Madam President, in reference to the preamble of the draft convention which you have circulated on 22nd May 2017, there are several pertinent points which Indonesia wishes to share with this esteemed conference. All the participants gathered here have the same conviction that nuclear weapons posing the greatest threat to humankind must be entirely eliminated. This process of formulating a legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons is forging the path that would eventually lead to their total elimination. With that said, we feel that it is therefore important for the preamble of this instrument to emphasize and strengthen the delegitimation of nuclear weapons as an object, and then the legitimization of nuclear deterrence as a concept. Hence, Indonesia wishes to once again reiterate the ultimate goal of this conference, which is the prohibition of nuclear weapons, both existing and planned. Consequently, the body of the text of the treaty should include correct keywords such as total elimination of the existing nuclear weapons, humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons, delegitimization of nuclear weapons and to achieve a world without nuclear weapons in our lifetime. Syntax's variations would, of course, be welcome, but not in terms of deviations in principle. Indonesia is also of the view that a more explicit reference to the balance of all three pillars of the NPT, the contribution and the knowledge of IAEA and CTBTO, as civil society participation, should be reflected in the preamble section. Indonesia will endeavor to constructively contribute further in the weeks to come. I thank you, Madam President.
Agradezco la distinguida.
I thank the distinguished delegation of Indonesia, and I'll give the floor to the delegation of Malaysia.
Thank you, Madam President. I join the other speakers before me in commending you for the remarkable work that you have done in leading this process since early this year. I also associate my delegation with the statement delivered earlier by the permanent representative of Thailand on behalf of ASEAN. I just want to make a point that the zero draft that you have prepared, Madam President, is an excellent draft for us to work on. We see the draft as a balance, and of course, there are still some fine-tuning that all of us we need to do in the coming weeks or in the coming days. We also feel that we need to ensure that the convention that we are negotiating would strengthen the global norms against the use and possession of nuclear weapons through focusing on core prohibitions, that it stigmatizes nuclear weapons. I repeat, it stigmatizes nuclear weapons and not countries, to ensure that this instrument will be inclusive and have pathways open for other states to become party in the future, including those possessing nuclear weapons and those that have defense arrangements with them. And I also agree with the views made by several representatives who spoke before me on the need to not to go, sometimes not too much, into the details, in particular the Articles 4 and 5, because those are complex issues that we need to be balanced in the sense that not too detailed but not too general. But of course, my delegation will offer itself to work together with other delegations in the course of our negotiation. And finally, Madam President, on the preamble, on the text that you have prepared, in general, we find those paragraphs under the preamble are balanced and captured more or less what has been expressed by delegations during the March meeting. But of course, along the way, there will be some minor proposals or amendments that my delegation would make as we move along. So with that remarks, Madam President, I thank you very much.
Le agradezco al distinguido.
I thank the distinguished ambassador of Malaysia for his statement. I now give the floor to the delegation of Cuba.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I'd like to begin by stating how pleased Cuba is to see a distinguished representative of a brotherly Latin American nation presiding over our work. And of course, I wish you every success. And you can rest assured that you can count on the full support of the Cuban delegation. I'd also like to welcome the High Representative for Disarmament Affairs and also wish her every success in her important functions. I wasn't planning to take the floor because I thought you were asking us, in order to save time, to move on directly to presenting our proposals on the preamble. But given that the floor has been opened up for general comments, I would like to beg your indulgence just to express a few initial ideas. First of all, I'd like to thank you for introducing the draft. In Cuba's view, this presentation has come at a timely juncture. It's given us reasonable amount of time to study it, and we think that your draft is a good basis to begin this negotiation. And it allows us to move closer to the approval on the 7th of July of a historic convention to prohibit nuclear weapons. Secondly, let me say that Cuba shares the general approach of your proposal. We think it's a simple text, a reasonable text, and a pragmatic text. Of course, we feel that it still requires some work and that the text could and should be improved and strengthened in various important areas. And to that effect, Cuba will be introducing specific amendments at the appropriate time. To conclude, Madam President, let me just stress that Cuba believes that this conference is a historic opportunity, and therefore our respectful call to all delegations to make good use of this opportunity so that not just this generation but future generations can benefit. Thank you.
Le agradezco.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Cuba. And I did want to say that we have a limited number of delegations that have stated they want to make general comments. So I think we are on the right track here to be able to conclude and also allow delegations to take the floor if they so wish. The delegation of South Africa has the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. My delegation wishes to thank you for your leadership and to assure you of South Africa's full support and cooperation toward the successful conclusion of this UN conference and in executing the mandate of the General Assembly towards the conclusion of a legally binding instrument prohibiting nuclear weapons, leading to their total elimination. We also like to welcome the High Representative for Nuclear Disarmament, Madam Izumi Nakamitsu. Madam President, can I make some general remarks before commenting on the preamble? My delegation welcomes the draft text 0, compiled circulated as A/CONF 229/217 CRP1 on the basis of our discussions during March this year and a subsequent informal consultation you held in Geneva and New York. Zagwa believes that the draft text provides an excellent basis for negotiations during this second session of the UN conference, broadly reflects the views expressed and proposals made by various delegations. We look forward to our deliberations over the next few weeks with the aim of adopting an effective, credible, non-discriminatory, legally binding instrument prohibiting nuclear weapons. From South African perspective, the proposed instrument is not a proverbial silver bullet that can cure all ills. Its main purpose, we believe, is to encourage progress towards a total elimination of all nuclear weapons by delegitimizing and stigmatizing such weapons on a global scale. For this reason, South Africa supports the conclusion of a non-discriminatory international treaty that will ban nuclear weapons. To maintain a world without nuclear weapons and will clearly require further measures to be negotiated at a later stage, hopefully with the involvement of all states, nuclear and non-nuclear weapon states. At the same time, my delegation believes that for such an instrument to be an effective and credible tool, non-discriminatory provisions are needed to allow not only those that had never produced nuclear weapons, and those that had already eliminated theirs, but also for the states that possesses nuclear weapons to join while they commit to eliminate their nuclear arsenals within a specified time frames. Likewise, it may be necessary for the treaty to recognize the right of states to participate in military activities with states not party to the treaty, but with unambiguous obligations that will ensure that their actions are consistent with the letter and spirit of this treaty. It is important that no additional obligations be imposed on non-nuclear weapon states that go beyond their obligations under the NPT, particularly any restrictions on inalienable rights of states to develop, research, production, and use of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. In our view, a link with NPT and other treaties, such as the CTBT and nuclear weapon-free zone treaties, may be useful, but no element should be included that could be objected by the state not party to such instruments. Cyber support for the prohibition of treaty without prejudice to its continued support for the conclusion of a treaty banning the production of fissile material for nuclear weapons, as well as comprehensive nuclear weapons convention or a framework on nuclear disarmament. This treaty is also not a substitute for the various agreements reached in the NPT context that remain unimplemented. It is our hope that this new instrument will be the beginning of an era that will witness the fulfillment of the long-held wishes of the victims of nuclear weapons, Hibakushas, and the broader international community to finally rid our world of the threat posed by this most indiscriminate, inhumane instrument of mass annihilations. Madam President, now I want to turn to the preamble. On the chapeau of the preamble, my delegation has no strong views on this, but believe that it may be more appropriate to refer to the instrument as a treaty, and this will clearly distinguish it from proposed nuclear weapons convention. Also, the other partial instrument dealing with nuclear weapons such as NPT, CDBT, and nuclear weapon-free zones, treaties, are all called treaties. More focus, Madam President, on OPP because of time. On PP3, firstly, we support the proposal that has been made by colleagues like Brazil. It is important that the preamble also recognizes the unacceptable risks posed by nuclear weapons to civilians and the lack of any adequate response capacity to deal with the catastrophic humanitarian consequences. We can be flexible in terms of the language and placement of these elements. On PP 14, my delegation is of the view that it is important to those to also recognize the role of all states in the call for the total elimination of nuclear weapons. In addition, there is a need to also recognize other victims of use and testing of nuclear weapons, and not to only single out one set of victims. In addition, my delegation has two proposals to make in order to further strengthen the preamble. One, the preamble needs to recognize the ethical and moral imperative for a world free of nuclear weapons, as contained in various resolutions adopted by General Assembly. I want to be practical and propose the following formulation. And it reads, acknowledging the ethical imperative for nuclear disarmament and the agency of achieving and maintaining a nuclear-free world, which is a global public good of the highest order, serving both national and collective security interests. That is one practical input on the preamble, Madam President. I will give it in writing. The second practical proposal can be added to PP 7 of the preamble. We propose the following formulation. It reads, recalling that, in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations, states must refrain in their international relations from the threat or the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations, and that establishment and maintenance of international peace and security are to be promoted with the least diversion from armament of the world human and economic resources. Madam President, we will forward you this practical addition to the preamble. I will stop here for now. Thank you, Madam President.
Le agradezco al distinguido.
I thank the distinguished ambassador of South Africa, and let me just say that we've taken note of the specific comments that you've made on the preamble, and so really we're almost ready to get down now to the discussion of each individual paragraph. We still have 5 delegations that have asked for the floor. And then I think we'll get moving on the article-by-article read-through. But I'm going to give the floor now to the delegation of the Netherlands.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The Netherlands would like to express its appreciation for your efforts in producing the draft text of a convention on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. We have every confidence in your abilities to lead these negotiations to a productive conclusion. A world without nuclear weapons remains our undisputed goal, and we hope that these proceedings will constitute a meaningful step towards this goal. As we have stated during the March round of these talks, there are 5 criteria for the Netherlands for a convention prohibiting nuclear weapons. 1. It has to be an effective step towards a total elimination of nuclear weapons. 2. It must be compatible with existing instruments, and in particular, it must respect and safeguard the Non-Proliferation Treaty, including Article 6. And 3. It must enjoy broad support within the UN, including among nuclear possessor states. 4. It must be verifiable. And 5. It must be compatible with our obligations as a member of NATO. Madam Chair, we have closely studied and analyzed the draft text that you distributed, which was based on the discussions we had here in March. We consider this draft a useful starting point for the discussions in the next 3 weeks. Still, it contains a number of elements that require improvement or alteration. The Netherlands shares the desire of all those present here to make further headway with the implementation of Article 6 of the NPT. We fully support the goal of a world without nuclear weapons, and to that end, we have been an active participant in various disarmament processes. And this, of course, includes our chairmanship of the NPT PrepCom 2017. And we will keep negotiating constructively and in good faith in an attempt to bring the text of the draft in line with the aforementioned 5 key elements of our position. We will further develop and clarify our positions regarding the different elements of the treaty during the topical discussions and consultations in the next 3 weeks. And therefore, I will limit myself here to a number of overall points that we would like to address. To increase its effectiveness, the draft text should be slimmed down, simplified, and shortened. And at this stage, a number of its provisions copy existing obligations, set up unnecessary procedures, or are confusing. It should become more clear what the goal and purpose of the instrument should be. We would like to bring the draft text more in line with existing structures and instruments, most notably the NPT, in order for it to strengthen these instruments. The provisions on verification need strengthening, and at this point the text weakens, not strengthens, existing norms. It also requires a stronger, forward-looking provision on disarmament verification. And several of its provisions should be clarified or brought more in line with existing law and practices. And the text that is currently before us contains elements that are incompatible with our NATO commitments. And at this point, it also lacks any considerations related to international stability and security, despite the fact that this is of crucial importance. And the relation between the prohibition and disarmament, too, remains elusive in the current text. And addressing these issues would increase the effectiveness of the Convention. The Netherlands will negotiate in complete transparency about its positions and intentions. We would like to clarify on the outset that it will be unable to sign up to any instrument that is incompatible with our NATO obligations, that contains inadequate verification provisions, or that undermines the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And I would also like to stress that the instrument needs to enjoy broad support within the UN, including among nuclear possessor states. Madam Chair, the Netherlands looks forward to engaging on these and other issues, and clearly we have a busy 3 weeks ahead of us. And the Netherlands are looking forward to constructive discussions under your excellent leadership. And Madam Chair, now please allow me to cluster one, the text of the preamble. The Netherlands is pleased with the clear references to humanitarian consequences of the use of nuclear weapons as humanitarian considerations for an important pillar under our disarmament and non-proliferation efforts. However, we are concerned that any reference to aspects relating to security and stability is lacking in the current text. Addressing these issues is an important condition for progress on disarmament and is essential in securing the support of a broader group of states for the instrument. The preamble furthermore contains a number of provisions that should be brought further in line with existing law in order to further strengthen the text. I thank you, Madam President.
Le agradezco al distinguido.
I thank the distinguished ambassador of the Netherlands for your statement. And now I give the floor to the delegation of Nigeria.
Madam President, let me seize this opportunity to thank you, being the first time my delegation is taking the floor, and to commend your efforts so far. We believe, Madam President, that the text we have before us is a constructive starting point. So, Madam President, in you, we believe we have a brilliant enterprise, and we also believe in your efforts so far. Madam President, I think it was the distinguished representative of Austria that stated earlier that should we all stick to instructions from our various capitals in stricto sensu, we would end up having several opinions, perhaps more than 130 proposals on each and every line here. Nevertheless, our effort here is to enrich the wonderful text we have before us and to make a few proposals that will further sharpen the text you have given to us. So it is in view of this, Madam President, that my delegation, together with others, will be looking at the text with a view to adding more value to it. For example, we will be bringing some proposals to the table. We believe it must have been an oversight that we're discussing nuclear weapons, and the very first resolution passed by the General Assembly was in a way escaped the radar, but I believe that was inadvertent. So we'll be introducing a para along that line, whether to replace or to retain, but surely we would want a situation where we'll be guided by that. And I think it will be in line with what the Madam High Representative said earlier, that we need to have a text that is legally sound, technically accurate, and politically wise. I believe I got you right, Madam. So we shall endeavor to be guided by this in our introduction of such proposals together with our dear colleagues. I thank you, Madam Chair, and I believe we will support you along the way. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Nigeria. As I was saying, we're going to have Egypt, Mexico, and New Zealand that are still waiting to speak, and after that we will move on to comments on the preamble, which I will be presenting. And after that, as we've done at previous sessions, we will give time to representatives of civil society to conclude this part. And then I'll move on to explaining the preamble. Egypt has the floor. Egypt, we have a problem. We can't hear you.
Thank you, Madam President. Since this is the first time I take the floor in the second session, my delegation would like to commend you for all of your efforts in presenting the zero draft. You have our full support and can count on my delegation's cooperation. My delegation believes that the zero draft serves as a good basis for the draft convention. We believe that despite the inclusion of several elements that were reflected in the first session, there still remains several elements that need to be incorporated, and my delegation will be suggesting during the course of the negotiations these elements. From a general perspective, we believe that the draft should first not create unnecessary additional commitments with provisions already incorporated in the NPT that would create duality, and I'm making particular reference here to Article 5 concerning safeguards. Second, refrain from creating unnecessary provisions that may insinuate the creation of separate groupings of states. The draft convention, in our perspective, should be simple and with more clarity, setting new international norms for the prohibition of nuclear weapons, but also creating a pathway leading towards the total elimination of nuclear weapons. And third, with regards to the preambular section, it should include strong references that not only reflects the prohibition of use of nuclear weapons, but also express concern for their reliance in military and security doctrines, as well as the lack of substantial progress with nuclear disarmament and the existence of nuclear weapons in its totality. We will be submitting to the Secretariat in writing our suggested language and proposals to be circulated to all delegations. Madam President, my delegation stands ready to contribute constructively and in good faith to these negotiations to ensure a successful end to these negotiations by July 7th. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Egypt. I'm just going to mention the list here of those that have asked to take the floor. I said that we still have Mexico, New Zealand, and Iran and Kazakhstan have also asked for the floor. So at this point, we'll close the list. And then we will give the floor to civil society with the agreement of the conference. And then I will get into my introduction of the preamble. So Mexico has the floor now.
Señora Presidenta.
Madam President, let me begin by thanking you for the work that you have done, for all of your efforts. We welcome the draft treaty that we have before us, which is a good basis to enable us to successfully conclude the work of this negotiating conference. We're very proud that this very important process that is beginning its second session today is being led by a country of our region. One further demonstration of the commitment that Latin America historically has had to the noble task of bringing about a world free of nuclear weapons. You can count on the full support of my delegation in your functions. With regard to the general discussion of the preamble, we feel it's relevant to think in this section about the fact that all of this came about because of the legitimate concern of the international community, given the risk of a nuclear weapon being detonated intentionally or accidentally. This would have disastrous humanitarian consequences. That's why my delegation feels that there are additional elements, humanitarian elements, that could help to strengthen this aspect in the preamble. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias a la distinguida.
Thank you very much to the distinguished delegation of Mexico, and I now give the floor to the delegation of New Zealand.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Since we all met here in March, you and your team have been assiduous in carrying forward the preparations to lay the groundwork for a productive and successful outcome to this negotiation. The New Zealand delegation is very grateful for your efforts, and in particular for the draft convention set out in CRP1. As you observed during your recent consultations, Madam President, and again stressed this morning, this first draft is intended as a starting point for our negotiations. We believe you have given us all an excellent foundation on which now to build our final text. My delegation will be conveying its more detailed views on the draft put forward in CRP1 over coming days in accordance with the schedule you have outlined for us. For today, I would like first to make some general observations on the text overall from the vantage point of the fundamental objectives for this negotiation, which I believe all of us here share. And after that, I want to move on to today's particular subject of the preamble. Madam President, in moving forward now to put in place the architecture essential for nuclear disarmament, we must ensure that our treaty provides a firm basis for implementation of all the provisions, both disarmament and non-proliferation, of the NPT. We must not permit any diminution of the non-proliferation gains secured over the nigh on 50 years of that treaty. No barrier should be incorporated into the new legal instrument which might work against its potential universality and against, therefore, the ultimate achievement of our aspirations for a nuclear weapon-free world. To that end, the basis for adherence at any point, in particular by states currently possessing nuclear weapons, must be clear and feasible in terms of process and procedure. Viewing the text against these reference points, Madam President, we believe you have indeed been successful in building strongly on the foundations of the NPT. The set of prohibitions contained in Article 1 gives us an excellent basis to carry forward our work. That said, we would hope that it will prove possible to make better use of the successes of the NPT's system of safeguards by providing a stronger framework under Article 3 to ensure compliance with the core prohibitions of Article 1. We also wonder whether the bifurcation in Article 1, as between paragraph 1 and paragraph 2, is in fact necessary, and whether it might not be preferable to combine the two paragraphs, which in some respects are duplicative, into one set of obligations. We would welcome a better understanding of the advantages in providing under Articles 4 and 5 of the Draft Convention for two separate pathways for adherence by nuclear weapon possessors. In our view, the process envisaged in Article 5 of a standalone additional protocol to govern the terms and conditions, including verification, for adherence by any nuclear weapon possessor is likely to offer the most viable route. But clearly, there is a need to incorporate into the text of the Convention a much greater level of detail about the process and procedure for putting such protocols in place in order to provide clear reassurance to all states about the substantive requirements and the procedures for this Article 5 pathway. I would like now to provide some comment on the preamble. I note that there's much we like and welcome in the draft you have given us, Madam President, but we do think that there is room for an additional level of detail in it, most notably in spelling out the current rules of IHL, and which have, after all, been such an important motivating factor for all of us here in terms both of the adoption of UNGA Resolution 71-258 and also of the various processes, including the humanitarian initiative on nuclear weapons that preceded it. Accordingly, Madam President, I will focus my remarks today only on those areas in the preamble, essentially legal and IHL-related ones, where we would wish to see the text strengthened or where we believe there are gaps to be rectified. So with your agreement, Madam President, I will go through New Zealand's proposals regarding the preamble now. Firstly, we would welcome either a new preambular paragraph or the incorporation into the text of language added to an existing preambular paragraph from the important acknowledgement in the 2010 NPT outcome document regarding compliance with international law and IHL. If included as a standalone paragraph, this could, for instance, be inserted straight after current PP3 along the following lines: reaffirming the obligation on all states at all times to comply with international law, including international humanitarian law. Second, we strongly support the primary focus of the present paragraphs 4, 5, and 6 on the principles and rules of IHL, but we think it valuable that the preamble recall and emphasize all the fundamental tenets of IHL and not just those aspects outlined at present in PP4. We would welcome the reactions of those here to a possible expansion of the IHL-related language, which could read along the following lines. Firstly, we would suggest a new paragraph that, quote, aware that the right of the parties to an armed conflict to choose methods and means of warfare is not unlimited, unquote, could then be followed by an expanded PP4, which might, for instance, say, basing themselves on the principles and rules of international humanitarian law, including the rules on distinction and precaution, the prohibition of indiscriminate attacks, the rule on proportionality in attack, the prohibition on the use of weapons of a nature to cause superfluous injury or unnecessary suffering, and the rules on the protection of the natural environment. And finally, in the context of IHL, Madam President, we would propose a slight reframing of the Martins Clause as it is currently set out in PP6, which could instead say, stressing that any use of nuclear weapons would be abhorrent to the principles of humanity and the dictates of public conscience. Thirdly, we would like to suggest consideration of a merger of the current PP8 and 9, which could then read, bearing in mind that the prohibition of nuclear weapons would be an important contribution towards comprehensive nuclear disarmament and the total elimination of nuclear weapons. Further, we would recommend that in PP12 we acknowledge the source of the famous quotation which is set out there. This could be along the following lines, quote, recalling the unanimous...
Excuse me, Ambassador. Can I, podría rogarle si puede...
Could I ask you, please, since you're making some very specific proposals, if you could keep them until we come on to the next section so that we can all give them the due attention that they deserve. Thank you.
Certainly, Madam President, very happy to do that.
Muchísimas gracias, embajador.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We have two final delegations that ask for the floor, and I'd also like to ask them that if they have any particular proposals, as I said at the beginning of the session, that you wait for those until we go to the introduction paragraph by paragraph of the preamble. The delegation of Iran has the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. In the name of God, the most compassionate and most merciful, Madam President, I would like to thank you for providing us with a draft that provides a basis for our negotiations. I wish you success and assure you of the full support and cooperation of my delegation. The objective of my delegation, like many others, is to conclude the negotiations by 7 July 2017 and adopt a legally sound, binding, and technically accurate instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons. To achieve this objective, we need to work hard and adopt a flexible and innovative approach to resolve differences, and we have to have clarity and common understanding in what we want to achieve by this instrument. In this context, the delegation of Iran looks forward to working with you and other delegations constructively. Madam President, you can rest assured of the support and cooperation of my delegation. I would like to make a few general points with regard to the draft and the way forward. First, the prohibition instrument should neither undermine nor repeat the provisions of existing legal instruments like the NPT and CTBT. Rather than repeating the provisions of existing instruments and creating legal confusion, the prohibition instrument should offer tangible added value by complementing existing treaties. To do this, we need to go beyond what is already existing. Some prohibitions, like prohibition of the use of nuclear weapons, meet this criteria, and some others fall short of this criteria. For example, in dealing with nuclear testing, the new instrument should build upon the CTBT and fill its gaps. One of the officials of a new nuclear weapon states at the UN Security Council meeting, which adopted a resolution on CTBT, said that the advances in technology in today's modern world of virtual capacity, computerization, and artificial intelligence has already provided nuclear weapon states with the capability to conduct nuclear weapon-related testing without the need to conduct actual nuclear explosion. Therefore, instead of repeating the prohibitions on nuclear test explosions that exist in the CTBT, our main concern and objective should be to prohibit subcritical testing and those carried out via computer simulation to develop and improve nuclear weapons. This indeed will have a real benefit, would strengthen the CTBT, serve its object and purpose, and of course prevent redundancy and legal confusion. The same applies to issues related to the NPT and in particular concerning the safeguards. Madam President, you have stated that the instrument needs to be simple and non-discriminatory, and in addition to comprehensively and effectively prohibiting nuclear weapons to construct a solid foundation for our future endeavor in establishing and maintaining a nuclear weapon-free world. This is an important question related to our main approach in developing a new instrument and requires us to have a clear vision about its scope, nature, and final shape. For example, if we are to develop a comprehensive convention on nuclear disarmament, we should apply its requirements. If it is the case, we need to follow the CWC model that covers all related issues in detail, clearly defines each and every rights and obligations of the parties, establishes an independent organization, and creates a robust verification mechanism. On the other hand, if we are to develop a simple prohibition convention, we also should stick to its requirements. In this case, we need to develop a simple treaty prohibiting a range of activities related to nuclear weapons, and, as you mentioned, creating a foundation for the realization of our ultimate objective, that is the total elimination of nuclear weapons. At this stage, we need to reach a common understanding on the approach and act accordingly. If the common understanding is to follow the first approach, we need more time and patience, and above all, more studies on legal and highly complicated technical aspects of the issues involved. And if the conference's common understanding is to adopt the second option, it will allow us to avoid complicated legal and technical aspects of the issue and focus only on prohibiting nuclear weapons and conclude the negotiations by 7th July. Iran's long-standing position and preference, Madam President, has been a comprehensive convention on nuclear disarmament. It is, in our view, the best way to achieve nuclear disarmament and maintain a nuclear weapon-free world. It is also in line with the ultimate objective of the total elimination of nuclear weapons set forth in SSOD-1, final document, and numerous resolutions of the UNGA, and above all, our explicit obligation under Article 6 of the NPT. At the same time, we are quite aware of the time limit and the fact that in this limited time available to us, the practical solution and achievable objective is to focus only on the prohibition approach at this stage without getting into issues related to verification and destruction. We cannot afford to have a halfway solution on issues relating to destruction. In any case, our point is that at the beginning of our negotiations, we need to have a common understanding on our approach. Such a common understanding will facilitate drafting of this instrument. As you, Madam President, have clearly stated today, and in your briefing in Geneva and New York, the draft is not exhaustive of all these issues discussed in March. As it was apparent at that session, that further discussion needed on a number of important issues. We also realized from what you have said that you have set aside certain issues as, in your view, they were not ripe enough for drafting. In our view, these are quite natural, taking into account the high importance and nature of the subject, complicated technical and legal aspects of the related issues, as well the security and political consideration involved. Madam President, we have some views on the preamble part. When we get there, we will raise those issues. I thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Iran, and as last speaker, we have the delegation of Kazakhstan. And I'd also ask if you could be brief so that we can move forward as we had proposed. The delegation of Kazakhstan has the floor.
Madam President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, honorable representatives of the non-governmental organizations. I greet everyone at the second session of this very important conference. We commend you, Madam President, for your outstanding and painstaking efforts and determination that has made this exceptional draft possible. It is a balanced draft that has been positively welcomed by all of us and we will improve it further. My delegation also most cordially welcomes our new High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, Her Excellency Izumi Nakamitsu, and thanks her for the robust leadership she has already begun to provide us. We assure you of our full support and wish every success to both of you in all your endeavors. Kazakhstan has the honor to participate in this discussion, which we consider very important for humankind. Kazakhstan had always firmly opposed nuclear weapons and made considerable efforts both at the national and international levels to promote nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. We attach great importance to the preamble, as this part of the document indicates the circumstances that gave rise to the treaty's adoption, its intent and goals. And the preamble sets the tone for the document and reflects the importance attached to it by the participating states. Therefore, we are in favor of a strong preamble pointing out the historical importance of the document as a breakthrough in the field of nuclear disarmament. We are for clear disclosure of all the dire threats, as well as of even the existence of nuclear weapons. Finally, Madam President, we see this conference as a step towards a world free of nuclear weapons. I thank you.
Le agradezco a la
I thank the distinguished delegate of Kazakhstan.
Quisiera agradecerle a las delegaciones.
I wanted to thank delegations. I know that some delegations wanted to take the floor before I introduce the preamble, so I'd like to thank delegations very much for those that contributed so enthusiastically to the discussion. As we progress in our discussion of the text, there will be a lot of opportunities, I think, for you to make specific comments and also general observations that you may have on the text as a whole. So I'd like now to move on to a presentation of the preamble of the text. And before that, I'd like to briefly thank delegations for the statements that they've made this morning. I think that they have highlighted the fact that this first draft that we have before us is really intended to be the backbone to our work, and we're going to be working on each of the vertebrae as the days go by of that backbone in order to address the mandate in Resolution 7158. And also I'd like to thank the High Representative for having given us an interesting standard that I hope we'll be able to maintain as an important guide for our work, namely that we should come up with a structure, a backbone that will be solid from a legal point of view, specific from a technical point of view, but also which will be politically wise and solid. And additionally, in the resolution giving us the mandate that I know all delegations will have in mind, we must pay particular attention to the fact that the instrument we're working on needs to provide a solid link to the remaining institutional legal links in the area of disarmament, particularly the current treaties in force, particularly the NPT. So you can be assured, High Representative, that we are going to provide some very appropriate follow-up to those instruments. And we'll follow this new standard that you have suggested that will serve as a guide. So, if I may, once again, I'd like to come back to my notes in English with regard to the presentation of the preamble, which is in English.
Then to begin by saying that the preamble of the draft convention seeks to concisely describe the motivation and aspirations of the parties and the object and purpose of the convention. At the outset, I would wish to emphasize that the intent in drafting the preamble was to capture in a succinct manner those elements which were absolutely essential in characterizing the history of this process, as well as the aspirations of the parties. With this initial draft, I have sought to limit its length, as you have noticed, to keep it in line with other treaties that address nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, so that we have a preamble that is strong but limited. There are no doubt many items that delegations may wish to see included, and I look forward to hearing your reflections on the draft, especially for those delegations that have not taken the floor. In making proposals for the language, I will appeal to you not to lose sight of the preamble as a whole, and in the narrative, we need to be mindful that it needs to be clear, strong, and focused. In attempting to consolidate all the ideas expressed in March, the draft preamble has been organized around 5 themes that you have already identified. Paragraphs 1 to 3 address the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons. Paragraphs 4 to 6 address international humanitarian law. Paragraphs 7 to 12 address disarmament and the relationship of the instrument with the disarmament machinery. Paragraph 13 addresses the relationship with other international instruments. Paragraph 14 addresses the role of public conscience and civil society. And in bearing in mind is this general structure of the preamble, I propose now that we conduct the review paragraph by paragraph. I would like to reiterate that to the delegations, the request that any matters that are not reflected in the current draft, including any proposals for new paragraphs, can be put to the consideration of the conference after we review the last paragraph under each of these subclusters. Let me then start with the preambular paragraph 1 that deal with the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons as the driving force for this initiative. Paragraph that reads as follows: deeply concerned about the catastrophic humanitarian consequences that would result from any use of nuclear weapons and the consequent need to make every effort to ensure that nuclear weapons are never used again under any circumstances. This paragraph tries to reflect the history of this process and the overwhelming desire expressed in March that this instrument should be underpinned by deep concerns over the humanitarian impact posed by the use of nuclear weapons. The elements in this paragraph are drawn directly from the resolutions of the General Assembly, including Resolution 71/2010 258, which convened this conference, as well as resolutions 71/46 and 70/47 entitled Humanitarian Consequences of Nuclear Weapons. The first part of the paragraph, expressing deep concerns about the catastrophic consequences of any use of nuclear weapons, also comes from the consensus outcome of the 2010 NPT Review Conference. The second part of the paragraph, on the need to ensure that nuclear weapons are never used again under any circumstances, draws from OP1 of resolutions 71/46 and 70/47. I now open the floor to the delegations that would like to comment on the preambular paragraph 1. Bien, ahora tenemos...
Very well. So now we'll begin with the list of speakers, and I have currently Cuba, Iran, Switzerland, and Liechtenstein. The delegation of Cuba has the floor.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much for your very useful introduction to the preamble. I'd like to make a proposal for an amendment to preambular paragraph 1, but I would before that like to propose an amendment to the title of the convention, if I may. Our specific proposal for the title would be to add at the end the sentence
towards their total elimination. Voy a leer el título completo.
I'll read the complete title now in English as we propose it should be amended.
Draft Convention on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, leading towards their total elimination. Esta sencilla...
That simple draft amendment, Madam President, has the primary objective of ensuring that the title of the convention adequately reflects its content, and secondly, to guarantee that the title adequately reflects the mandate that was given to this conference by the General Assembly in Resolution 71/258. With regard to preambular paragraph 1, we have a two-part amendment. Firstly, it would be a slight change to the current wording of paragraph 1, and the second amendment would be a proposal for an additional paragraph, which would be PP1 bis, in order to complement the content of the paragraph, and I'll read out the proposal in English.
Then the proposal would be in the second line of PP1 to replace the current phrase that reads, make every effort, by the following language: completely eliminate them. So I'm going to read the whole paragraph as good read with my amendment. Deeply concerned about the catastrophic humanitarian consequence that could result from any use of nuclear weapons and the consequent need to completely eliminate them to ensure that nuclear weapons are never used again under any circumstances. Entonces, señora presidenta, como le decía...
So, as I said, Madam President, the second part of the proposal would be a PP1 bis that I will also read out in English.
Convinced that nuclear disarmament and the total elimination of nuclear weapons are the only absolute guarantee against the use or threat of use of nuclear weapons. Las razones de esta propuesta, señor.
The reason for this proposal is that in Cuba's opinion, it's very important that the preamble accurately reflect the close relationship that exists between security and the guarantee that nuclear weapons will never be used and the concept of the elimination of these weapons. We are firmly convinced that up until such time as these weapons, until these weapons are absolutely eliminated, there can be no total guarantee that the weapons will not be used. And we feel that this is something shared by delegations here present. And that is the thinking behind the two proposals that we make for Preamble Paragraph 1. Thank you.
Le agradezco a la delegación de Cuba.
I thank the delegation of Cuba, and we would be very grateful if you could pass on that proposal to the Secretariat, Cuba. I now give the floor to the delegation of Iran.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, since we are considering the preambular part, and of course the first preambular paragraph always is very important, I do agree with Cuba that we need to elaborate the ultimate goal in this paragraph, and simply I would like to support his suggestion, both suggestions that had been made by Rodolfo on preamble paragraph 1 has our support, and we fully support that. Thank you.
Le agradezco a la delegación.
I thank the delegation of Iran. The delegation of Switzerland has the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. As I didn't ask for the floor before, I would like to start with some more general remarks. First and foremost, I would like to thank you for all your efforts and the way you've been chairing this conference so far. And I would also like to thank you for circulating the zero draft already months ago. We are of the view, Switzerland is of the view, that this draft text represents an excellent basis for our work. At the same time, we still have a lot of work ahead of us. The text must be further improved, balanced, and streamlined in a number of areas and completed in others. Negotiating a treaty of such a great importance and significance as this one in such a short time is a daunting task, and we hope that discipline rather than haste will be our guide. But again, we're here in best hands. In negotiating this treaty, we should have two key considerations in mind at all times. We must ensure that the treaty makes a clear contribution to nuclear disarmament, non-proliferation, and the strengthening of relevant international law in view of moving towards a world free of nuclear weapons. And we must simultaneously ensure that in doing so, we do not inadvertently undermine existing treaties and regimes or curtail key legitimate interests of states. My delegation is determined to contribute and cooperate with you and your team and with all interested delegations in order to meet these objectives. Now let me turn to the preamble. Generally speaking, I would like to stress our view that any treaty's preamble should set the foundation for the treaty by stating where we come from and where we want to go with such a treaty. The preamble should therefore be based on common understandings, restate the international legal principles upon which we base ourselves, and provide context and a number of orientations. With these elements in mind, let me share some considerations regarding the text of the preamble. It is crucial to anchor this treaty in the existing body of international law, in particular international humanitarian law, as well as related humanitarian aspects. In this context, we welcome that several paragraphs introduce these dimensions. At the same time, we believe that these paragraphs on IHL and the humanitarian aspect should be reinforced by a number of considerations. PP1 should be completed by a mention on concerns about the risks of intentional, of course, accidental and miscalculated use of nuclear weapons. And if me allow, as it is interrelated, I would like to make one more remark on PP2. It should be completed by a reference to the deep concern about the lack of adequate humanitarian response capacity to any use of nuclear weapons, consideration that has emerged at the 3 humanitarian conferences on the consequences of nuclear weapons. I will be happy to come back to PP4, PP5, and PP13. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I
thank the Ambassador of Switzerland for her contribution, and I give the floor to the delegation of Liechtenstein.
Thank you very much, Madam President. We have a number of smaller edits to this first preamble paragraph, which we believe would strengthen it a little bit in substance and make it also more readable. The first one would be in the first line after catastrophic, to insert the words "and unacceptable." Then we would, still in the first line, delete the last 2 words, "that would." In the second line, first word, we would write "resulting." And still in the second line, after the words "nuclear weapons and," we would include the word "recognizing." So the paragraph would read, "deeply concerned about the catastrophic and unacceptable humanitarian consequences resulting from any use of nuclear weapons, and recognizing the consequent need to make every effort to ensure that nuclear weapons are never used again under any circumstances." I'd like to also take this opportunity to thank the delegation of Cuba for their proposal, which we will study, and also we thank Switzerland for proposing to add the element of the risks that nuclear weapons pose here. This is something that we would very much support, be it here or as a separate preamble or paragraph. And finally, let me just quickly add that the way that you have drafted the title of this zero draft has been very appealing to us, and we would support keeping it short and simple, which is something that in our view does not undermine our collective belief that with this treaty we contribute to the broader project of elimination of nuclear weapons. But we would see a short and simple title for this conference as something very positive. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegation of Liechtenstein. The delegation of Egypt has the floor, and we also have Indonesia, Philippines, and Austria.
Thank you, Madam President. My delegation would like to suggest to make a reference in the beginning of PP1 to the concern that we have with the continued existence of nuclear weapons. Clearly, PP1 is making reference to the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of the use, but we think it would be beneficial to have references in the beginning to the existence of nuclear weapons in the beginning, and therefore my delegation would suggest to add in the beginning of PP1, at the beginning would be, I quote, "gravely concerned with the continued existence of nuclear weapons and the catastrophic humanitarian consequences that would result from any use of nuclear weapons." So we will just add the notion of the existence of nuclear weapons to the beginning of PP1. We will submit it in writing to the Secretary. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
I thank the delegation of Egypt. I now give the floor to the delegation of Indonesia.
Thank you, Chair. With your permission, may I just speak right after the delegation of the Philippines?
Con gusto.
Yes, of course. The Philippines, you have the floor.
Madam President, I have the honor to deliver this intervention on Cluster 1, the Preamble on behalf of ASEAN. If you will permit us, a regional body, to express general comments on the Preamble. Number 1, ASEAN approaches this conference guided primarily by the Southeast Asian non-nuclear weapons-free zone, which we consider to be ASEAN's most important contribution to the global aspiration of a nuclear-free world, and the NPT, to which we reaffirm our unwavering commitment. 2, in order to provide a clearer imperative for the draft instrument, we would like to see an emphasis on the following elements in the Preamble. A strengthened reference to the principles of the UN Charter in paragraph 7, including a reference to the peaceful settlement of disputes, the non-use of force or threat thereof, and respect for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, political independence, and non-interference in the domestic affairs of any state. A recognition in paragraph 13 of the complementary nature of this legally binding instrument with the NPT, and a strengthened reference in paragraph 12 to Article 6 of the NPT and the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice of 8 July 1966 on the legality of the threat or use of nuclear weapons, and which established the legal obligation on all state parties to the NPT to pursue negotiations in good faith on effective measures relating to nuclear disarmament. We would also like to see further the inclusion of the following: a recognition of the important balance between nuclear disarmament, non-proliferation, and the peaceful use of nuclear energy as enshrined by the NPT in paragraph 13. A reference to the United Nations resolutions related to the traditions of nuclear disarmament and those mandating this UN conference, including inter alia 1, the UNGA Resolution 1, adopted on 24 January 1946, on the establishment of a commission tasked to, inter alia, make specific proposals for the elimination from national armaments of atomic weapons and of all other major weapons adaptable to mass destruction. 2, the UNGA Resolution 71/258, establishing the UN Conference to negotiate a legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons, leading towards their total elimination. And 3, the UNGA Resolution mandating and following up on the high-level meeting of the General Assembly on nuclear disarmament. A clear mention of the inalienable right of states to the use of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, in particular for their economic development and social progress. And although the object and purpose has been implicit, we would like a provision on the object and purpose of the legally binding instrument, which is to establish universal legal norms to prohibit nuclear weapons and to delegitimize the concept of nuclear deterrence, leading towards a total elimination of all nuclear weapons under strict and effective international control, which would ensure collective security for all. Thank you, Madam President.
Le agradezco al distinguido.
I thank the distinguished delegate of the Philippines on behalf of ASEAN. The delegation of Indonesia has the floor now, followed by Austria and Nigeria.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Firstly, I'd like to associate with the intervention just delivered by the permanent representative of the Philippines. With that, I would also like to add some few points. First, my delegation would like to support what was just introduced by the delegation of Switzerland by adding the risk element in the first preamble paragraph, namely the risk related to accident, miscalculation, and also by intention. And also on PP2, we also subscribe the view that there is a lack of capacity by member states of the UN to address and also to cope with nuclear accidents. So in that, we would like to propose some language in PP2. It would read as follows. It would read after cognizant that the catastrophic consequences of nuclear weapons, and then the new language would be exceeds any nation's medical and rehabilitational capacity, comma, and its effects transcend national borders. So it would read in total as follows: cognizant that the catastrophic consequences of nuclear weapons exceeds any nation's medical and rehabilitational capacity, and its effects transcend national borders. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank the delegation of Indonesia. Austria has the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. It's quite uplifting that most delegations are thinking always along the same lines, and also my delegation thinks that we should mention, like Switzerland and Indonesia and others have proposed, the issue that the catastrophic consequences cannot be adequately addressed by the humanitarian means, and we think this idea is so important that we shouldn't just put it into the PP1. We think it would perhaps be better visible as it is an additional thought if we would have a new PP, and our version would read, mindful that the catastrophic consequences of a nuclear weapon detonation whether by accident, miscalculation, or design, cannot be adequately addressed, and that the only way to guarantee that nuclear weapons will never be used again is through their total elimination. Where does this formulation come from? It comes from the statement that was given by my minister on behalf of certainly more than 130 states at the 2015 review conference of the parties to the treaty, to the NPT. In April 2015, it was the joint statement on the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons. And so we have a little bit this idea, once we use language that was adopted by almost everyone who's sitting here in this room, it's a little bit easier perhaps to agree on a language, because recycled language usually is not innovative, but it has such a high degree of acceptance. So as you see, what we do with this formulation is we bring also in the very good proposal made by Cuba concerning the only way is a total elimination. And that's an important thought and should be reflected in the preambular part. Finally, I would like to support what my colleague from South Africa has said in his statement. In our view, treaty seems to be more adequate to our legal instrument than convention, because it's not a comprehensive convention, it is a treaty. Thank you.
Le agradezco al distinguido.
I thank the distinguished ambassador of Austria. And I give the floor to the delegation of Nigeria. We'll also have Malaysia, Palestine, Kazakhstan, and Ireland.
Tiene la palabra la delegación de Nigeria.
Delegation of Nigeria has the floor.
Then, Madam President, I will be speaking, number one, on the title, then on PP1 as well. Madam President, I fully agree with what the distinguished representative of South Africa said in his remarks, and of course also echoed by Austria just now, that we need to define this right away as a treaty. So let us know. Of course, there've been back and forth scholarly exercise on what constitutes a convention, but just for clarity, so let's just stick to treaty. And secondly, Madam President, I would like to agree with our dear colleague from Egypt. Now, but the reason why we would, particularly on the notion of ensuring that we start with the continued existence. So because we need to first establish the fact that they are there, then we can now key into the fact that they are there, but they ought not to be there because of so and so reason. And that's why the issue of humanitarian consequences will come in. And for two reasons. Number one, Madam President, it serves this purpose by establishing practically the existence and presence of these weapons. And secondly, that whatever we're doing henceforth, so we're going to build on that pivot that this is already there. So we're taking from that to explain what we're doing henceforth. So that will be our intervention for now, Madam President. Thank you.
Muchas gracias a la delegación de Nigeria.
Thank you very much to the delegation of Nigeria. Malaysia has the floor.
Thank you for the floor, Madam President. We wish to also associate with the statement made by the Philippines on behalf of ASEAN, and now share with the conference our contributions on the preamble, which we view sets the tone for the convention. We are of the view that the framing of the preamble of the instrument within a humanitarian lens as appropriate, as this process was catalyzed and moved forward through the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons initiative. We also view that the preamble section as the appropriate place in the text to function as a compromise section, in that issues that are not able to be accepted in the main operative text, but which could be accepted somewhere in the text, can be referred here. We wish to address some of the elements outlined in the preamble, particularly in two areas. On PP6, as the paragraph highlights IHL, the question is on the reference to cases not covered under this convention, presumably cases not related to nuclear weapons. The language in emphasizing cases not covered by this convention and the speaking of essential law principles applicable to civilians and combatants in its second half suggests that the intent of the PP is to reinforce IHL. However, as IHL only applies to armed conflict and the only possible cases covered in the convention where armed conflict would occur is with regard to use in Article 1, then the language may need to be reconsidered. As such, we seek further clarification on the intent and need of the paragraph, as well as to explore whether such a preamble is necessary. On paragraph 8, on the reference to comprehensive nuclear disarmament, we view that this paragraph could be refined through a stronger verb, other than bearing in mind to highlight the purpose of the instrument within the overall nuclear disarmament landscape. We are also grateful for the very constructive proposals made by other delegations who have spoken before me, and will be looking at these proposals closely with the view to work in supporting them. With this, I thank you, Madam President.
Le agradezco a la
I thank the distinguished delegation of Malaysia. The State of Palestine has the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and allow me first to thank you for all the hard work that has gone into allowing our conference to proceed in the best possible circumstances, and for the draft that we have in front of us, which constitutes a very solid basis for our work. Along the lines of what has been said by previous delegations, maybe also the resolution, UN General Assembly Resolution 71/58 can be of some assistance in its preamble, And I quote, it says, "Convinced that the continuing existence of nuclear weapons poses a threat to humanity and all life on Earth, and recognizing that the only defense against the nuclear catastrophe is the total elimination of nuclear weapons and the certainty that they will never be produced again." It continues by stating, reaffirming the commitment of the international community to the realization of the goal of a nuclear weapon-free world through the total elimination of nuclear weapons. We believe some of this language reflects a lot of the comments that were heard, and the same resolution also refers to the threat, not only to the use of nuclear weapons, but also to the threat of using such nuclear weapons. We also agree and support the need for a short text and a simple text, and that is why, like many other delegations, we will suggest some additions, but we will try to keep them as limited as possible to maintain the text. And when we arrive to that, we will also support adding the key principles of IHL into the text and the same paragraph that was in the NPT on the UN Charter and the threat and use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of states.
Le agradezco.
I thank the distinguished delegate of the State of Palestine, and I give the floor to Kazakhstan.
Thank you, Madam President. We agree with the general line indicating that the fact of nuclear weapons are the most gravest threat to humanity. And my delegation would like to propose to strengthen the wording of paragraph 2 with the following. Reiterating our grave concern about the danger to humanity posed by the existence of nuclear weapons, and reaffirm that their total elimination remains the only absolute guarantee against their use or threat of use. So we do believe that not only the use, but even the very existence of nuclear weapons pose a threat to all humankind. And it's only their total elimination that can ensure that nuclear weapons will never be used in future under any circumstances. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Le agradezco a la delegación.
I thank the delegation of Kazakhstan. The delegation of Ireland now has the floor, followed by New Zealand, Mexico, South Africa, and Brazil.
Thank you, Madam President. As Switzerland and Cuba and others have already suggested, one of the most compelling reasons that we need urgent progress on nuclear disarmament is the current impossibility of any adequate humanitarian response to the catastrophic effects of nuclear detonation. And we strongly believe that this determinant factor should be reflected in the preamble of the new convention. I think already this morning we have heard a lot of support for this need and maybe a few options for how we might deliver it in the convention. I think overall, though, we would support the suggestion made by Austria to include a new paragraph in this respect as being the best way to give it the prominence that we think it deserves. Thank you.
Muchas gracias a la delegación de.
Thank you very much to the delegation of Ireland. The delegation of New Zealand has the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I would wish to add my support to those other delegations who have acknowledged the importance of incorporating into the preamble the element of risk and lack of response capacity. We could certainly support the language put forward by Austria, which, as the Austrian ambassador noted, is recycled from the joint humanitarian statement. So that, I think, would be an excellent basis to be introduced as a new early preambular paragraph here. One other element, could I respond to, Madam President? The suggestion made by the distinguished delegate of Cuba that the title of the convention or treaty should be expanded to include the reference to the leading to their total elimination. I must say for my delegation's position, I agree with the comments made by the representative of Liechtenstein that this destroys the current simplicity of the title. If there is a need to emphasize further than is already in the preambular language, if there is a need to emphasize where this convention or treaty is intended to go, I think that perhaps the better way to do this would be to incorporate an explicit reference to the mandate given us in UNGA 71-258 and perhaps cite there the specific intention that this instrument lead to the total elimination of nuclear weapons, but certainly my delegation would not wish to support the expansion of the title in this way. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the distinguished ambassador of New Zealand, and I give the floor to the delegation of Mexico.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam President. My delegation believes that the elements presented by Cuba with the PP1 bis, also Switzerland for PP1 and PP2, and Indonesia in PP2, Switzerland in PP1, and the new paragraph proposed by Austria strengthen the aspects related to the humanitarian aspects of nuclear disasters. And so we'd like to support the proposal presented by Austria because we feel that several of these elements are reflected in the paragraph. Thank you.
Muchas gracias a la
Thank you very much to the delegation of Mexico. South Africa has the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. South Africa agrees with the sentiments that have been expressed in the proposal put forward by Austria with regard to the elements of risk and the lack of adequate response capacity. South Africa support this proposal. Thanks, Mr.
Muchas gracias a la delegación.
Thank you very much to the delegation of South Africa. The delegation of Brazil has the floor, followed by Mozambique.
Thank you very much, Madam President. We are pleased to note that just the first preamble was the object of so many different constructive proposals with which we could agree, that we could support. I just feel that there's a dispersion as we go along because some of the proposals starts addressing issues that will come up again further down the preamble. But in any case, we would not wish to let it go by without stating that we support many interventions, including the ones from Cuba. Of course, not the changing of the title for reasons given by other delegations. We think in substance we agree, but we prefer the short title because it's, I think, better. It's a better description of the treaty, a better, shorter, and more better suited also for projecting the treaty universally. But we agree with the substance of their comments and the proposals they have made, making the first paragraph stronger in what respect to the issue of complete elimination. We also sympathize and support Liechtenstein's comment, which also seeks to strengthen mentioning the unacceptability, the word unacceptable, catastrophic consequences, so on and so forth. I think the Egyptian contribution is very positive because it raises the issue of continued existence of nuclear weapons, so we should acknowledge and recognize that they continue to exist. And that's a grave concern, I think, for all. With respect to the Swiss proposals, we could agree that it would be an improvement to highlight elements of risk But in this respect, we would like to support the Ambassador of Austria's proposed additional paragraph, which mentions those elements of weapon detonation, whether by accident, miscalculation, or design, etc., based on the language from the humanitarian pledge. And I think we're going in a very good direction. But of course, it will be your challenge to sort this out, because as we proceed, there's a very, very large number of new ideas emerging. Thank you.
Le agradezco.
I thank Ambassador Patriota of Brazil, and I give the floor to the delegation of Mozambique. And I'd like to remind you that, as has been the practice in this conference, at the end of each segment, we do allow time for civil society to take the floor. We have a new request for the floor now, the delegation of Bangladesh. After that, with the agreement of the conference, we will open up the floor for civil society to be able to speak to the conference, also in general terms, as we've been doing this morning. The delegation of Mozambique has the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. We have not taken part in the general debate. Therefore, I would like to start by congratulating you most warmly for the excellent leadership you are providing to this conference, and we wish you all the success. It is very clear from the text that we have before us that your job has been excellently performed so far, and let me pledge the strong support of my delegation to you and to your team in steering us to a successful outcome of this conference. First of all, we would like to express our overall support for the text before us, in particular the preamble. It is well written, and it states in very good terms what most of us are expecting from this exercise. We recognize the importance of streamlining the text, give it more strength and cohesion, and bring into the text the relationship with other legal instruments. In that connection, your task appears to be daunting in harmonizing and bringing together all the very positive proposals that are being made. At this stage, my delegation would like just to make a very general comment in supporting some features that have been presented here by many delegations. First of all, we would like, yes, to support the idea that rather than calling it a convention, we should call it a treaty, and it would be in harmony with many other legal instruments that we already know. As for the title, we think that it should stay as it is, but the expression regarding leading towards their total elimination should find a place in one of the preamble paragraphs. So in this since we would like to support basically the proposal by Cuba, but rather than putting it in the title of the convention or treaty, it would be in one of the preamble paragraphs. Let me, since my statement is a very genuine nature, express our support to many proposals put forward here, namely by the delegation of Austria, New Zealand, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and Egypt. We accept all of those proposals, and in this connection, I would agree with the distinguished ambassador of Brazil that your task will be, it is a daunting task, but a happy one, because the ideas converge in a very positive manner. So, Madam President, my delegation will be ready to support you throughout the process, and we will give our humble contributions as we proceed. Thank you very much.
I thank Ambassador Comisario for her kind words and for his remarks. We will, of course, accept everybody's help in this regard, but I think we are on good track as well. I would like to give the floor to the delegation of Bangladesh. I see the delegation of Cuba has requested for the floor as well, so I would like to request your indulgence so that we can also give the floor to the civil society. The delegation of Bangladesh has the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would like to also join other delegations in thanking you for presenting a good basis for our work during the next 3 weeks. We also thank you for the efforts that you have invested in coming up with this concise yet comprehensive draft. With regard to the preambular part, our delegation has taken careful note of the various proposals that have just been made by a number of delegations. And as my preceding speaker just said, we can also align with many of these proposals. We have taken the floor in particular to stress the point about underscoring the threats and risks posed by the continued existence of nuclear weapons. And we believe some useful text has already been proposed in that regard. In that context, our delegation would also like to see a particular mention of the diversion of resources for the development, maintenance, and modernization of nuclear weapons that is having an adverse impact on sustainable development efforts. We do recognize that the issue of possible implications on socioeconomic development and the global economy has been addressed in PP2, but we believe that the point about the diversion of important and useful resources to the building of nuclear weapons and its impact on sustainable development should also be recognized in the preambular part. While we have the floor, we would like to add our voice on this suggestion to address the point about the eventual total elimination of nuclear weapons in the preambular part, since we are envisaging this draft convention to be a framework legal document. And again, we see merit in the points made by Cuba as well as other delegations in at least addressing the point about eventual or leading towards the eventual elimination or total elimination of nuclear weapons in the preambular, if not specifically in the title. To conclude, we would particularly also thank you for having a clear reference to general and complete disarmament under effective international control in PP11, which is something our delegation attaches a lot of importance to. We look forward to continuing our work and assure you of our delegation's continued support. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Le agradezco a la distinguida.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Bangladesh. The distinguished delegate of Cuba has the floor. Thank you very much, Madam President. I've asked the floor in particular to request clarification with regard to how we're going to proceed. My delegation has several other draft amendments for the preamble, but as I've understood, it's your intention to give the floor now to non-governmental organizations. Now, that's not a problem for Cuba, of course. We always welcome and find useful the opinions and contributions of NGOs. But I assume that later delegations will be able to continue with the read-through of the preamble and to present our proposals. A modest suggestion, if I may put this forward, Madam President, and of course Cuba is in your hands, but certainly for Cuba it would be better when we go through reading through future clusters that once we begin the reading paragraph by paragraph, we don't conclude that reading until the end of the cluster. That would help us to have a comprehensive overview of what delegations feel about each cluster. That's just a suggestion, Madam President, for your consideration. Thank you. I thank the distinguished delegate of Cuba for your suggestions.
Sí, quisiera responderle.
I'd like to respond to the question that was put to us by Cuba. Whether, as we begin the conference, whether a group of delegations are able to make statements as we begin to consider the text. Well, the group that wanted to speak kept getting bigger. More and more people were asking for the floor, and this also has meant that we were able to give the floor to civil society so that then, when they've spoken, we can conclude the general comments. But, of course, we will continue to maintain this practice of having the clusters, and then at the end of each cluster, we'll proceed in the way that we've been proceeding in the past. So, but it's 5-1.
Dice que la delegación de Ecuador quisiera.
The delegation of Ecuador has a point of order.
Sí, señora Presidenta.
Yes, Madam President, and good morning. Since it's a point of order, I won't be referring to the substantive aspects of the discussion. And, of course, my delegation supports civil society speaking at the end of each cluster. But I just have a doubt on the order here. You've just recalled us of the decision that was taken and on which my delegation acted by not taking the floor, namely that there would not be general declarations made at the beginning, but that we were going to get down to work on the preamble. Now, you indicated that the decision, once it was adopted, was also discarded, and it was reintroduced, and then a cluster was added to our work this morning for general statements. Now, if that's the case, my delegation would agree that we should give the floor to NGOs under the cluster of general statements. But for the record of this meeting, we need to leave aside the decision that was taken following your recommendation, with which we agreed to begin our work straight away. So my delegation has understood, and we will inform our capital accordingly, that there has been a cluster of general statements, after which, quite correctly, some non-governmental organizations of civil society are going to speak. But as was said by the distinguished delegate of Cuba, it is rather confusing. I was prepared to speak about the preamble, and new preambular text as well, on your suggestion, should be made at the end of the cluster on the preamble, not during the discussion. So my delegation is a little confused about this order. Or maybe I just don't know what order we're following, but I do want to state clearly that for my delegation, we feel that we have revised the calendar of activities, and there was a section for general statements at the beginning of the morning, and therefore the decision that was taken was left aside. And that is why, quite rightly now, the floor is going to be given to civil society organizations only for general statements and not for the preamble. Thank you.
Le agradezco a la distinguida.
I thank the distinguished delegation of Ecuador, and I'll answer your question. I was just asking the Secretariat about time management here, and I'd like to refer to the indicative timetable that was given to the conference. Originally, we planned to spend a day and a half on a general exchange, a general debate, and what we proposed, it's true, was to make this change so that we could begin discussions, and that remains in force because we have begun to discuss the preamble, and we have spent longer on that than we intended to, and we've had these requests for the floor on the understanding that we were going to hear some general interventions with regard to the first part of the treaty. I think that for the first part of the session, it's important that delegations have had the opportunity to be able to express themselves as they have, but these, let me stress, were general comments before we entered into specific paragraphs. And and we're going to follow this same procedure for this afternoon. I think we've had a first morning and a first exchange that really was very productive, and I think that we're on the right track, and we've been able to hear general comments. We've taken due note of your requests and also the concern of the delegation of Cuba. But we're going to follow the program of work as we initially announced, even though we made a slight exception this morning. We have an extra 5 minutes of interpretation, I've been told, and so if you agree, we could give the floor to NGOs for those 5 minutes with translation, and then the rest of the time will just be in English. So we'll just do that before lunch, and then this afternoon we'll begin with the proposal for work that we have agreed upon.
Si es entonces esta la manera de proceder.
So that's how we're going to proceed. I would like to give the floor to Mayor Matsui from Hiroshima, the Mayors for Peace.
Thank you, Madam President, for giving me the opportunity to address this United Nations conference to negotiate a legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons. I'm speaking today as mayor of Hiroshima, the first city attacked by a nuclear weapon, to share the honest wishes of the Hibakusha for the elimination of nuclear weapons. 72 years ago, on August 6, 1945, a single atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima, reduced the city to ruin. Even those who barely managed to survive have been tormented by lifelong suffering. They've gone through the sorrow of losing their beloved families and friends, the long-term effects of the radiation, and the constant anxiety about their health and their offsprings. Having gone through such indescribable misery, they've arrived at the unspeakable conviction that no one shall ever again suffer as we have, and continue to appeal for nuclear abolition and their fervent desire for peace to the people of the world. Their earnest wish is to witness the prohibition of nuclear weapons in their lifetime. We sincerely welcome and thank Ambassador White, President of the conference, for the inclusion of a reference to the sufferings, as well as a contribution of the Hibakusha in her excellent draft convention text released recently. We also welcome that the draft contains provision to allow future participation of those states currently dependent on nuclear weapons. This is in line with the proposal of Mayors for Peace, which I preside over. It is our strong hope that through open and constructive discussion in this session on the basis of the President's draft, the resulting new treaty will become a clear-cut prohibition treaty that will also reinforce and strengthen existing legal instruments. I therefore strongly hope that such a new treaty will be adopted in this session. Our challenge after the successful adoption of a new treaty will be clear. We need to persuade nuclear-armed states to give up their bad habit of investing in wasteful nuclear weapons modernization programs and to encourage them and their allies who have boycotted the negotiation to join the treaty. For this purpose, contracting parties to the new treaty and a wide range of civil society partners will need to join forces to conduct honest dialogues with the nuclear-armed states and their allies to remind them that reliance on nuclear weapons is not only useless for solving current challenges of international security, but will also endanger the survival of the entire human species. Furthermore, the entire world community need to cooperate and work together to ensure that the new treaty will become a fully effective legal instrument to achieve nuclear abolition. We believe that such effort will also help accelerate good faith nuclear disarmament efforts by the nuclear-armed states. It is time for policymakers of the world, especially those in the nuclear-armed states, to exercise decisive leadership in implementing their nuclear disarmament obligation. If they are serious about preventing nuclear proliferation, they should recall that past progress in nuclear disarmament took place during peaks of international tension through courageous joint initiative of political leaders who reached it out. As shown in the case of the conclusion of the Limited Taste Burn Treaty in 1963 and the Intermediate Range Nuclear Force Treaty in 1987. It is their turn to do it again now. Mayors for Peace, with nearly 7,400 member cities in 162 countries and regions, will continue to cultivate broad global opinion towards nuclear disarmament. We will continue to work together with our diverse partners in the world to nurture a collaborative international environment that encourages world leaders to take decisive and insightful leaderships towards nuclear abolition. We do so in our conviction that when the entire world community can cooperate to strengthen peaceful dispute settlement mechanisms in line with the spirit of UN Charter, the world community moves closer to peaceful world without nuclear weapons. Let us begin this work today. I thank you very much, Madam President.
Le agradezco al...
I thank Mayor Katsui from Mayors for Peace for your message to this conference, always reminding us of the historic importance of the work that we are doing here in this room. The interpreters exceptionally enabled us to work with interpretation until this time, so we can now continue, I think, for another 5 minutes in English until 1:15, and then we'll conclude this session. I give the floor to Madam Kasai Kimiyo, President of New Japan Women's Association.
Madam President, I speak on behalf of the New Japan Women's Association, an NGO working to protect children against nuclear war for 55 years. I also represent the Japan Council Against Atomic and Hydrogen Bombs. The government of Japan is not present here, but an overwhelming majority of Japanese women and people stand with you, hoping to see this conference take a historic step forward by adopting the Convention to prohibit nuclear weapons. I warmly support your effort. The signature campaign initiated by Hibakusha has gathered support from 2.96 million people so far in Japan. Many people are marching now in Orizuru paper crane parade in many cities in Japan to show solidarity with you all. I welcome that the draft convention totally prohibits nuclear weapons on the ground of their humanitarian impact, clearly refers to the role of the Hibakusha and civil society, and includes gender perspectives. Heightening international tensions are the reason why we must hurry to eliminate nuclear weapons. They should not be used as a pretext to oppose to it. We call on nuclear weapons states to fulfill their promise to eliminate their nuclear arsenals. We particularly urge the government of Japan, as the only nation that suffered the atomic bombings, to play an active role by supporting, signing, and drafting the convention. We women and citizens of Japan are strengthening our efforts to achieve a nuclear weapons-free world. Thank you very much.
Le agradezco a la señora Kimillo, presidenta de la nueva Asociación de Mujeres de Japón, por su intervención. I'm sorry, I'm reminded that there is no interpretation at this moment. So I was thanking Ms. Kimillo, president of the New Japan Women's Association, for her message for this conference. We will now then proceed to finalize this session. The meeting is adjourned and we will reconvene at 3 p.m.